Imagine stepping outside in the absolute dead of July.
Oh, yeah. Rough.
Right. It's, that brutal, suffocating summer heat, the kind where the air just feels incredibly heavy, the pavement is radiating, and within seconds, you are just covered in sweat.
The absolute worst.
Exactly. And we usually think of that heat as just like a temporary discomfort, right? You go back inside, you crank up the AC, you cool down, and it's over.
You'd certainly think so.
But what if it isn't over? What if that intense heat isn't just making you sweat, but is actually sending a permanent, like a software update to your brain?
A very stealthy update.
Yeah, a stealthy, invisible update that permanently changes how your body stores fat.
I mean, we are looking at a profound paradigm shift in biology here. We are talking about the human body literally recording the external climate deep into its own cellular hard drive.
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are unpacking a truly groundbreaking new paper recently published in the journal Cell.
It's a massive study.
It really is. We are going to completely map out this newly discovered biological pathway that researchers are calling the skin-hypothalamus axis.
Right.
To get your bearings, think of your body as like a high-tech smart home. Your skin is the external thermostat sitting out on the porch.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. So when it gets dangerously hot outside, it doesn't just, trigger the local cooling system. It sends an emergency encrypted signal directly to the house's central control hub, the brain.
Right, bypassing everything else.
Exactly. And that signal permanently alters how the house manages its energy grid.
So to truly understand the mechanics of that smart home, we need to first look at the real-world evidence showing that this phenomenon actually occurs. The researchers, they refer to this as heat memory.
Heat memory, wow.
Yeah, and they started by designing this highly controlled environment for mice. They exposed a group of mice to 37 degrees Celsius.
Which is about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yes, so quite hot. And they did this for 6 hours a day, every single day, for a full week.
So they basically simulated a grueling outdoor workday during a summer heat wave.
Precisely. But the critical part of the experiment wasn't the heat itself, it was what came after.
Okay, what happened?
Following that week of heat stress, they put the mice back into a normal, comfortable room temperature for a full 2 weeks.
So they get a break.
Right. This is the quiescent recovery stage. And by all outward metrics, I mean blood sugar, circulating stress hormones. The mice had completely recovered.
They were just acting normally again.
Entirely normally.
Yeah.
But after this 2-week recovery, the researchers shifted them onto a high-fat diet.
And this is where the results are just staggering. Because, you'd think the mice had recovered weeks ago.
You would.
But these specific heat-exposed mice gained significantly more weight. They developed much worse insulin resistance, and they showed a massive drop in their resting energy expenditure compared to control mice.
The control mice who were kept at room temperature, but fed the exact same high-fat diet, right?
Right. The heat-exposed bodies essentially just stop breaking down fat. The formal term for fat breakdown is lipolysis, and that process just, it ground to a total halt.
Yeah, the heat exposure left a shadow, a persistent metabolic vulnerability. And the researchers knew they couldn't just rely on rodent biology for this.
Right. You need human data.
Exactly. So they took this into the real world by tracking a cohort of 342 delivery riders in Changsha, China, over the course of a brutal summer.
Wow, 342.
Yeah, and they continuously monitored their daily heat exposure.
I mean, delivery riders are out there in the thick of it, navigating those asphalt heat islands all day. It's the perfect human equivalent to the mouse model.
It really is. And they found that cumulative exposure to temperatures above 37 degrees Celsius positively correlated with long-term increases in BMI and something called abdominal visceral fat area.
Okay, and that's the deep, dangerous belly fat that wraps around your organs, right?
Exactly. They also saw massive spikes in insulin resistance. And here is the real kicker. These metabolic issues were still highly present in November.
Wait, November?
Yes, months after the summer had actually ended.
Okay, wait, that makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, I see people sitting in saunas all the time specifically trying to sweat off weight. Doesn't sweating in the heat usually burn calories?
That's the common assumption, yeah.
So why on earth is this intense heat making these riders gain weight months later?
It comes down to the fundamental difference between acute stress and chronic stress. Acute heat, like a 20-minute sauna session, will cause a transient spike in your heart rate and calorie burn as your body works aggressively to cool down.
Right, your body's working hard in the moment.
Exactly. But chronic, repeated heat stress over days and weeks triggers a deep, ancient survival mechanism. It creates that lasting heat memory.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, from an evolutionary standpoint, the body interprets this relentless environmental stress as a massive warning sign of, like, impending famine or drought.
So it panics.
It essentially prepares the organism for future hardship by shifting the metabolism into a highly conservative mode. It stops burning fuel and starts hoarding energy, primarily by storing fat.
So the body thinks, it's dangerously hot, crops are going to fail, we need to save every single calorie.
That's exactly it.
That is wild. It makes you wonder if you've ever noticed your own metabolism shifting or stubbornly holding on to weight after changing climates or dealing with a brutal summer.
Definitely.
Like, it might not just be the extra iced coffees, it might be the weather itself. So just to make sure we're completely tracking the setup here for you guys listening, let's do a quick recap.
Sounds good.
First, repeated heat stress creates a lasting vulnerability to obesity. Second, this phenomenon was proven in both controlled mouse models and human delivery riders. And third, the metabolic dysfunction persists long after the heat exposure ends, proving a true memory effect. But that raises a massive logistical issue for me. The heat hits the skin, but metabolism is controlled by the central hub inside the skull. How does the skin physically send a text message to the brain?
Finding that messenger was the next major hurdle for the researchers. They performed a classic, yet really fascinating procedure.
What did they do?
They extracted blood serum from the heat-stressed mice and transfused it directly into normal, naive mice that had never experienced the heat.
Whoa.
Yeah, and instantly they transferred the heat memory. Those naive mice developed the exact same metabolic vulnerability to the high-fat diet.
Which proves definitively that the messenger was a chemical traveling in the bloodstream.
Exactly.
And they tested that blood serum and identified the culprit, right? It's a protein called KLK14 or kallikrein-related peptidase 14.
That's the one.
Now, KLK14 is usually just a local, low-level maintenance worker in the epidermis, the top layer of your skin.
Right, it hangs out.
But when the severe heat hits, the dominant cells in the skin, the keratinocytes, go into total panic mode. They produce massive amounts of KLK14 and just dump it straight into the blood.
And its journey through the blood is incredibly specific. It travels all the way up to the brain, specifically to the hypothalamus, which is the master regulator of hormones and metabolism.
The control hub.
Exactly. Deep within the hypothalamus, there is a tiny, crucial cluster of cells called the paraventricular nucleus, or PVN, that is KLK14's final destination.
So it's like a registered, highly classified chemical letter sent from the skin. It bypasses the liver, the heart, the lungs, all the other mailboxes in the body, and is delivered to one extremely specific address in the brain.
A very exclusive address.
Right, and that address is a receptor called the CHL1. And this receptor sits exclusively on the surface of a very unique subset of brain cells known as LRRC7 positive astrocytes.
Now, astrocytes are a type of glial cell in the central nervous system. And, historically, neuroscience viewed glial cells simply as the glue of the brain.
Just passive scaffolding.
Right, just holding the important cells, the neurons, in place.
Yeah, I always thought neurons were the absolute stars of the show, doing all the thinking, processing, and signaling, while astrocytes just, swept the floors and provided structural support.
That was the old way of thinking, for sure.
So why is a subset of support cells taking the lead in completely overhauling human metabolism?
Well, neuroscience is currently undergoing a massive revolution regarding astrocytes. They are not passive glue at all. They are highly dynamic, active participants in neurological signaling.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the researchers discovered that when the KLK14 protein from the skin binds to the CHL1 receptor on these specific astrocytes, the astrocytes undergo a radical physical transformation.
They literally expand in size, don't they?
Yes, they physically swell up. They alter their internal programming to become the physical storage site, the biological hard drive of this heat memory.
That fundamentally changes how we view our own biology. The skin is acting as a massive endocrine organ.
It really is.
It is secreting proteins to physically alter the structure of your brain cells. Your skin is actively communicating with your brain right now about the temperature of the room you're in.
It's constantly updating the brain.
So to pause and recap the journey so far for everyone, heat, causes the skin to release the protein KLK14 into the blood.
Right.
KLK14 travels to the PVN in the hypothalamus. And finally, it binds to CHL1 receptors on these LRC7 positive astrocytes, triggering them to physically expand and activate.
That's the sequence.
But, a chemical briefly bumping into a receptor is a fleeting event. How does a single astrocyte cell hold onto that memory for weeks or even months without forgetting?
That takes us deep into the microscopic realm, right down into the nucleus of the astrocyte. This is the mechanism of epigenetic reprogramming.
Epigenetics, okay.
When KLK14 binds to the exterior of the astrocyte, it triggers a cascade inside the cell, massively ramping up the production of an internal enzyme called ALKBH1.
ALKBH1. Okay. To understand what this does, I think we need a visual. Let's imagine a specific gene inside the cell's DNA called the MAOB gene.
MAOB, right.
Picture the MAOB gene as a giant, heavy steel safe. Inside this safe is a massive, pressurized reservoir of a chemical called GABA.
A great way to picture it.
Right, because normally you don't want GABA flooding the brain randomly, so that safe has a heavy-duty padlock on it. In the DNA, that padlock is a specific chemical tag called N6MA.
Exactly. That N6MA tag is what we call an epigenetic marker. Epigenetics refers to chemical modifications that sit on top of your DNA.
The software on top of the hardware.
Exactly. They tell the DNA whether to turn on or off without actually changing the underlying genetic code.
Yeah.
So long as the N6MA padlock is on, the MAOB gene safe is locked, and the GABA is safely contained.
Enter the ALKBH1 enzyme. ALKBH1 acts exactly like a pair of heavy-duty industrial bolt cutters.
Yes.
KLK14 is the supervisor from the skin who calls down to the nucleus and orders them to use the bolt cutters. ALKBH1 violently snips off that N6MA padlock.
And once that happens,
Once that epigenetic tag is removed, the heavy steel door of the safe swings permanently open, and the MAOB gene is turned fully on.
and the biological consequence of turning the MAOB gene on is that the cell synthesizes the MAOB enzyme. This enzyme immediately begins producing and leaking massive, continuous amounts of the inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA directly out of the astrocyte.
Okay, if we are physically snipping structural tags off our DNA with biological bolt cutters, I have to ask about the long-term damage.
Sure.
Is this permanent? Like, if you endure one brutal summer, are your genes just stuck open, dooming you to gain weight forever?
To figure that out, the researchers utilized a highly advanced sequencing technique called ATAC-seq.
ATAC-seq.
Yeah. In simple terms, ATAC-seq allows scientists to see exactly which parts of the DNA are tightly spooled up and closed off, and which parts are unwound, open, and actively being read.
Oh, that's incredibly precise.
It is. And they found that after the heat stress, the chromatin regions around this MAOB gene stay wide open for about 4 solid weeks.
4 weeks of just leaking GABA.
Right. But the body is resilient. It slowly tries to heal the damage. The safe door gradually begins to close, and the padlock tries to reattach over an 8-week period.
Okay, an 8-week reset. That is a massive relief.
It is, but the researchers uncovered a critical caveat.
Oh, no.
If the mouse is exposed to heat again, before fully healing a scenario they call cycling heat stress, the memory is instantly recalled.
Wow.
The cell remembers the previous trauma, and the gene flies right back open, much faster and more aggressively than the very first time.
So the heat is quite literally rewriting the genetic expression of your brain cells by aggressively snipping off restrictive DNA tags.
Exactly.
It makes you pause and wonder what other invisible environmental factors might be secretly editing your brain's software right now without you knowing.
It's a slightly terrifying thought.
It really is. Let's pull all this together before we look at the final piece of the puzzle. Quick recap 3. KLK14 binding increases ALKBH1 bolt cutters inside the astrocyte. ALKBH1 snips off the N6MA padlock on the MAOB gene. And finally, this permanently opens the gene, allowing the astrocyte to produce massive amounts of the neurotransmitter GABA.
Perfect summary.
But GABA is a brain chemical. How does a chemical leak deep inside the hypothalamus translate to a spare tire of visceral fat around the waist?
To understand that, we have to follow the neural circuit out of the brain. We established that GABA is continuously spilling out of the astrocytes.
Right. The safe is open.
In the nervous system, GABA is universally recognized as an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Its entire job is to turn things down, to quiet electrical activity.
So it's a dampener.
Exactly. These expanded astrocytes begin dumping this GABA directly onto their immediate neighbors in the hypothalamus, a specific group of neurons called PVNOXT neurons.
The OXT there stands for oxytocin. So these are oxytocin-producing neurons. Now, most people know oxytocin as the love hormone or the bonding chemical.
Right, the cuddle hormone.
Yeah, but it actually has a massive, often overlooked role in regulating energy and metabolism.
It absolutely does. When the GABA pours onto these oxytocin neurons, it acts like a heavy, soaking wet blanket.
Yeah.
It completely smothers and silences their electrical firing.
And this is disastrous for your metabolism because those oxytocin neurons have a vital day job.
Very vital.
Under normal conditions, they send continuous electrical signals down the spinal cord, directly connecting to the sympathetic nervous system, or the SNS.
Right.
And the SNS wires directly into your visceral fat, specifically your epididymal white adipose tissue.
And that sympathetic nerve connection is the literal ignition switch for burning belly fat.
Oh, wow.
When the SNS is active and healthy, it releases a chemical called norepinephrine straight into the fat tissue. Norepinephrine binds to the fat cells and turns on specific molecular machines.
Proteins known as ATGL and PHSL, right?
Exactly. These proteins are the engines that perform lipolysis. They break down stored lipid droplets into usable energy for the body.
But if we trace the breakdown backwards, because the oxytocin neurons are smothered by the GABA wet blanket, the sympathetic nervous system goes completely silent. It's offline.
Right. Because the SNS is silent, there is zero norepinephrine delivered to the visceral fat. Without norepinephrine, those fat-burning molecular machines never turn on.
Exactly.
The fat cells don't know they're supposed to be releasing energy, so they simply stop breaking down lipids. The fat just statically accumulates.
It is a total breakdown in central communication.
Let me get this straight. This means our body is hoarding this fat, not because the fat cells themselves are broken or because the digestion is necessarily flawed, but because the central hub in the brain literally forgot to hit send on the burn fat email.
That is exactly the case. It's an information failure. And to prove this pathway was the exact cause of the obesity, the researchers performed a spectacularly elegant experiment.
What did they do?
They took a specialized retrograde tracer virus, a modified, completely harmless pseudorabies virus, engineered to glow fluorescent green, and injected it directly into the visceral belly fat of the mice.
Now, a retrograde virus travels backward along the neural pathways, right? Right. So they watched under the microscope as the glowing green virus jumped backward from the fat tissue, traveled up the sympathetic nerves, climbed the spinal cord, and landed squarely inside those specific oxytocin neurons in the brain.
Oh, so it mapped the exact physical hardwiring.
Perfectly. Then they used a technique called chemogenetics.
Chemogenetics.
Yeah. This involves installing artificial designer receptors onto those silenced oxytocin neurons, allowing the researchers to essentially use a chemical remote control to force the neurons to fire again.
That is sci-fi level science.
Truly. When they bypassed the GABA wet blanket and artificially reactivated those neurons, the fat accumulation in the mice stopped entirely.
Even on the terrible diet.
Yes. Their metabolism went back to normal, even while continuing to eat the high-fat diet.
That is an unbelievable brain-to-fat circuit. Knowing that stubborn belly fat might actually be an epigenetic brain signaling issue rather than just like a lack of willpower completely redefines how you have to view your own metabolism.
It changes the whole conversation.
It is not just a simple equation of calories in, calories out. It fundamentally depends on whether your brain is actually transmitting the signal to process those calories.
Precisely.
So let's do our recap number 4 here. Astrocytes release the GABA wet blanket, silencing oxytocin neurons.
Right.
Silencing those neurons severs the spinal connection to the visceral fat. And without that signal, fat cells stop releasing lipids, leading to severe weight gain.
Got it.
We know the exact origin in the skin, the exact bolt cutters in the DNA, and the exact silenced wires in the fat. The obvious next question is there any way to intercept this cascade before the brain is permanently rewritten?
The researchers asked the exact same question. They looked back at the very beginning of the chain reaction, the skin.
Okay, back to the thermostat.
Right. They discovered that during severe heat stress, the skin is aggressively bombarded by reactive oxygen species.
Which is basically massive localized oxidative damage.
Exactly. And to fight this off, the skin rapidly burns through its local stores of retinol, essentially depleting its primary defense system.
So the skin runs out of armor, panics, and sends the KLK14 SOS signal.
Yes. So to stop this, the researchers tested an intervention that is almost absurdly simple.
What was it?
They administered oral vitamin A specifically a form called retinol palmitate, during the initial heat exposure phase.
Just normal vitamin A.
Just vitamin A. And the results were nothing short of astonishing in both the mouse models and the human trials.
Oh, wow.
In the mice, the oral vitamin A successfully replenished the skin's retinol defenses. Because the skin remained protected from the oxidative stress, it never panicked.
It never sent the signal.
Right. It never overproduced the KLK14 messenger protein. Because the message was never sent, the astrocytes in the brain never expanded, the epigenetic bolt cutters were never activated, the oxytocin nerves kept firing.
And the mice maintained normal energy expenditure.
Exactly. They didn't gain the excess weight on the high-fat diet.
And they took this directly to the delivery riders, didn't they?
They did.
They set up a randomized, double-blind human trial with 59 riders in the blistering summer heat. Half received a placebo, and half were given 5,000 IU of vitamin A daily.
And the data was incredibly clear.
The riders taking the vitamin A had significantly lower KLK14 levels in their blood work, and crucially, it prevented the long-term increases in BMI and deep visceral fat that the placebo group suffered.
It is a stunning translation from a highly complex microscopic mouse study directly into a practical human occupational health intervention.
It truly is. However, hold on. I don't want anyone listening to rush out to the pharmacy right now thinking vitamin A is some kind of miraculous magic weight loss pill.
Oh, absolutely not. We have to be incredibly precise about what this means contextually.
Yes, what is the actual responsible takeaway from this intervention?
Vitamin A is not a universal fat burner. If you are sitting in a perfectly climate-controlled room and eating a poor diet, supplementing vitamin A is not going to magically make you lose weight. It works in this highly specific scenario purely because it maintains skin homeostasis. It acts as a targeted shield against a specific environmental stressor, the severe heat.
It's a preventative shield for the thermostat, not a systemic cure for all forms of dietary obesity.
Exactly. By fortifying the skin, it prevents the initial SOS signal from ever being drafted.
It stops the dominoes from falling right at the first push. So, our final mini recap. Heat stress depletes retinol in the skin. Oral vitamin A stops the skin from producing the KLK14 messenger, and this halts the entire brain reprogramming sequence.
That's the whole picture.
It's genuinely awe-inspiring that a basic, over-the-counter vitamin can completely disrupt such an intricate brain rewiring chain reaction simply by giving the skin the armor it needs.
It really highlights how interconnected our systems are.
It makes you wonder what other simple nutritional tools might be quietly protecting us from environmental extremes every single day without us ever realizing it. We have covered an immense amount of biological terrain today.
A lot of ground, yeah.
We started with skin proteins acting as encrypted chemical letters. We dove down into the nucleus to watch epigenetic bolt cutters unlock GABA safes. And we traced the silenced oxytocin neurons all the way down the spinal cord to the visceral belly fat.
It is incredibly dense, complex biology, but it is becoming essential knowledge for navigating the modern world.
Right.
When we pull back and look at the broader implications of this paper, it forces us to confront a rather profound reality.
Which is?
As the planet continues to warm year after year, we spend all our time talking about the external climate crisis. It's the rising sea levels, the extreme weather patterns, failing infrastructure.
Sure.
But this research proves we are simultaneously facing an invisible internal metabolic crisis.
Oh, that is the perfect way to phrase it. Our bodies are literally taking the rising temperatures of the planet and recording them directly into the epigenetics of our brains. As brutal heat waves become the standard baseline of summer, rather than, rare exceptions, how is human biology going to adapt to a permanently hotter world? Will our metabolisms permanently shift, keeping us in a constant state of hoarding fat just to survive the environment?
It entirely redefines how we must think about global warming. The heat isn't just an external force acting upon us. It is actively rewriting the software inside of us.
That is certainly a heavy thought to mull over the next time you step out into the blazing sun and feel that sweat start to bead. We are walking, adapting hard drives. Stay curious, stay cool out there, and keep exploring. Until next time on The Deep Dive.